How does the science of evolution fit with the age of the universe that we have established according to Torah view? Did dinosaurs exist? How long ago? Does the Torah make any mention of them? Join us and let's find out. Welcome back to Faith Meets Fact.
Thanks, Evremi. Let's talk about evolution, and along the way, let's address dinosaurs, fossils, and let's start with evolution. The theory of evolution is grounded on the best available scientific evidence. Evolution really came into its own with Charles Darwin when he published On the Origin of Species in 1859. There, Darwin laid out an argument that has, for all intents and purposes, stood the test of time, and only been supported by more and more evidence. Some of the best available evidence for evolution is the fossil record, which shows a history of transitional fossils that look like one species over time transitioning into another. Another excellent piece of evidence for evolution is just about everything that we've seen as we've gotten better at DNA analysis, showing that there are genetic connections between species that suggest a common ancestor. Studies of embryology also suggest that animals develop in similar ways, that all species develop in similar ways. And most of all, we can see evolution, at least on a micro scale. By that I mean, we can watch bacteria evolve. That's where antibiotic resistance comes from. We can watch viruses evolve. That's why I need a new flu shot every season. And we can even watch fruit flies evolve in the lab as they become more and more fit through natural selection. The evidence for evolution is, once again, excellent. And the good news is that the Torah is completely fine with that kind of evidence. The Torah does not particularly have any problem with evolution as it is, at least in its broadest strokes. We know for sure that God made the heavens and the earth. We know that God made the world in 6 days and he rested on the 7th. But God never tells us exactly how he made most species. It is completely plausible, and the Torah is okay with the possibility, that God used the mechanisms of evolution that we are now discovering to create the present biodiversity that we see in our rich world. To learn more about the Torah's perspective on the age of the universe, see our previous episode on the subject. That's not to say that authentic Judaism mandates support of evolution. It's just to say that authentic Judaism doesn't have an opinion one way or another on exactly how God did these things. Therefore, as long as the best available evidence points toward evolution, there's no particular reason for Torah to get into an argument over it. At the same time, we do have two major points of contention where there is an issue between the science and the Torah. The first point is that we only have 5,785 years to work with. That is, that evolution is completely plausible from the Torah's perspective, as long as it was done at speed. Evolution would have to take place over only a few thousand years, or only a few days of creation, in order for it to work with Torah. Our second major issue is that the Torah is very clear that God created 4 things ex nihilo, and that is mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. We are completely fine with the idea that God created the first animal ex nihilo, and from there allowed animals to evolve to their current state of biodiversity. And we're completely fine with the idea that God created the first human, Adam, ex nihilo, and then allowed human evolution from there, but there are some hard stops that we can't negotiate on. As long as evolution can take place in 5,785 years, and as long as we can allow for the ex nihilo creation of mineral, vegetable, animal, and human, at least the first one, evolution and Torah are going to have no conflict whatsoever. But that's a big ask, because evolution is supposed to take hundreds of millions of years, and sometimes billions of years, and the Torah only gives us 5,785 years to work with. This is not a particularly serious problem. God is capable of doing things very, very quickly, and God is incredibly efficient as a designer. It is entirely plausible that what would have taken random mutation and natural selection millions or billions of years takes God 6 days because he's very efficient at evolving species. This approach allows just about everything we know about evolutionary biology to be correct, just not on the same time scale. This approach will preserve the fundamental science while also preserving the integrity of Torah, and it's an approach that we used to some effect when discussing the age of the universe. The bigger issue is what to do with all of the evidence that very clearly shows a much older world when we look at evolution very closely. And that brings us finally to dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are supposed to have lived a couple 100 million years ago, and the reason why we think they lived a couple 100 million years ago is because their fossilized remains appear to be a couple 100 million years old. First of all, it takes about 100 million years to fossilize anything. Permineralization just doesn't happen all that quickly. Furthermore, when we check the rock around these dinosaur fossils, presumably from around the same time that the things that owned these fossils once lived, those rocks end up through radiometric dating to be a couple 100 million years old. So even if we suggest a rapidly expedited evolution, which would work pretty well with the science and pretty well with the Torah, we're still stuck with excellent evidence that these fossils are really, really old. The truth is that fossilization does not need to take hundreds of millions of years. Permineralization, the process by which most fossils form, can, under extreme conditions, happen over the course of a couple thousand years, sometimes even a couple hundred years. One classic example of this is Arizona's petrified forest, where an entire forest of trees is believed to have fossilized into rock over the course of a couple hundred years, perhaps a couple millennia. So it is entirely plausible that dinosaur fossils could have formed over centuries or over millennia rather than over hundreds of millions of years. Radiometric dating of rock is also not a foolproof method by any stretch of the imagination. A lava flow in Hawaii from 1801, which was once dated by radiometric dating to be billions of years old, was in fact only a couple hundred years old, and because of the particular conditions at that time, the radiometric dating results were skewed. Scientists also agree that extreme conditions can skew radiometric results. To be fair, scientists control for these sort of anomalies and cataclysmic events by taking samples from all over the world. It would take a uniform cataclysmic event that affected the entire world equally in order to truly skew the entire fossil record. And the Torah happens to provide a uniform, global, cataclysmic event of those proportions. Near the beginning of Genesis, the Torah tells us of a worldwide flood that covered the highest mountains, that lasted on the earth for 150 days, where the water was at incredibly high temperatures. A flood of those proportions, uniform, global, catastrophic, would certainly be enough to completely skew the fossil record forever, allowing for all bones on the planet to rapidly permineralize and also seriously skewing radiometric dating. The idea here is that the best available scientific evidence tells us that unless there was a uniform, global, catastrophic event of the proportions of the biblical flood, there's no way that dinosaur bones, and dinosaurs by extension, are any less than a couple 100 million years old. And the Torah comes in and tells us that there was a flood of exactly those proportions, and therefore dinosaurs were here, and all these fossils were here a lot more recently. We can therefore say that according to the Torah, dinosaurs may well have walked the earth, just a lot more recently than the best available evidence currently suggests. The beauty of this approach is that it's entirely authentic to Torah, and that it doesn't question the fundamental methodology behind science. The idea here is that evolution is entirely plausible, as is the fact that dinosaurs once walked the earth. However, it didn't happen at the time scale that the best available evidence currently suggests, for reasons that science could, in theory, get behind. God created the world very, very fast, and a biblical flood provided the cataclysmic conditions that science agrees would give us artificially aged fossils. At the end of the day, this approach synthesizes science and Torah. Evolutionary biology and paleontology remain valid fields of study, just not quite on the timescale that the best available evidence currently suggests. Back to you, Avrami.
Thank you, Rabbi Krish. We now have a general understanding of Torah's view on dinosaurs. Once again, it's important to remember that the Torah speaks of definitive truth, while science is always evolving. Join us next time for our next episode, where we will tackle the topic of superstitions and what the Torah has to say. Are superstitions real, or just a figment of our imagination? You don't want to miss this. Thanks for watching Faith Meets Fact.